Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Ma'moon Sbeh. I'm the president of APCO worldwide in the MENA region. Our chairman, Marjorie Krause, will be joining us soon. She has been facing some technical difficulties and she will be moderating this session. Until then, I will be doing so. So welcome. We will start to allow people to join. We will start in about 1 or 2 minutes. Okay. We're going to start right now, and as I said, hopefully soon our chairman Marjorie Krause will be able to join us, given the technical challenge that her computer is facing. Welcome everybody to the leadership series. This is something that APCO Worldwide has started, and hopefully every session we will discuss a topic of interest for our audience and for our clients and for our friends. So welcome for joining us. It's around 4:30 here in Dubai, and I'm sure it's a different time zones. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. The topic is a spotlight on technology and innovation. We have with us really some amazing speakers, and they are people who are experts in their field. I would like to just start by mentioning them. First, we have Lars Peterson. He is a former president of IKEA United States, and he's also a member of APCO's International Advisory Council. Welcome, Lars.
Thank you.
We have also with us from Dubai, Rania Masri. She is the Chief Transformation Officer for Shalhoub Group. And Rania will talk to us about the experience of Shalhoub Group and how they are using technology to transform their business. And of course, we have Joe Abi Akal. He is the Chief Corporate Development Officer of Majid Al Futtaim Group. And of course, these are two organizations who are, in my view, on the forefront of technological transformation, especially when it comes to their respective sectors. So welcome, everybody. And let's start. First and foremost, I would like to say that if you have any comments or questions, at the bottom of the screen, there is a Q&A button. Please press on it, and you can write your questions. We're going to do, everybody will speak for a few minutes, and then we're going to go into a Q&A. This is the normal mode. However, if there are some really good questions that will come out, we will ask them in the middle. And if somebody is speaking and you feel there is a burning question you want to ask them, please post it, and I will try to ask the question to the panelists. So, as an introduction to this, next slide, please, Rishi. As an introduction to this, I want to talk about the fact that there are so many emerging trends going around. And so the one before, Rishi, the slide before, please.
Just a second. So sorry.
Okay. Again, technology sometimes just doesn't although this is all about technology, but here we go. So, while the COVID-19 crisis continues to unfold, many businesses must try to imagine the new normal. We are all, as heads of businesses and members of businesses, trying to imagine the future and what is the new normal. So there is a host of significant and emerging trends going on. There are so many of them. They're impacting business, impacting government, impacting communities. However, during this webinar today, we want to focus on what we can learn from technology and innovation. Let's focus on those emerging trends to help adapt around the environment that we're facing today. Experience has shown us how much digital is impacting business, and it's going to be the driver of the future. We knew that before COVID, and now it's on a high speed. Some organizations have used these strategies to lead the way in their sectors. And of course, our panelists represent some of these companies and sectors, and they will talk about them. Here at APCO, we decided, as an introduction for this amazing, this workshop, we wanted to do our own research. And so next slide, please.
It's just taking a second. Please be
Okay.
patient.
So what we did, by the way, we've surveyed 300 people. This survey has been done in the past 48 hours, really. It's quite fresh. In UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait. And we wanted to ask them about their shopping behavior. Actually, the majority have been women of the respondents. It's an informal polling. It's not a scientific one, but I think it will help guide the discussion today. So let's look at our first findings. Here you can see on the left, we've asked people before COVID, what did they prefer in terms of shopping? And this is, I'm talking about shopping that is not related to grocery or food. This is all other shopping. And of course, 61% have preferred to go to store. Listen, if you are in the Western world, this could be a large number for you. In this part of the world, the rise of the malls and the rise of the shopping is still ongoing. And especially in Saudi Arabia, where a whole new host of malls are being built in line with the new development in Saudi Arabia. So the impact is quite significant. So a big majority of the population preferred up until now to shop in malls, and about a quarter like to shop online. Now, the impact on e-commerce is quite significant. So people are saying that they would like to go into online buying and online shopping. Now, let me just say this: these kind of surveys that are being taken during COVID are tainted by the fact that we are in the middle of it. So people are reacting to the fact that they are stuck at home. So we cannot take this as a trend that's going to go into the future for a long time, but it is definitely an indication of an ongoing trend. And I'm sure my colleagues, my fellow panelists will have a viewpoint on this as well. Next slide. So here, when you look at it, we asked people, if they want to continue shopping on e-commerce. We see lots of people want to continue doing that. And however, there is actually some barriers to online shopping, especially in this part of the world. And I think it's also to do with the rise of the sudden rise of online shopping, which is the infrastructure that supports it. So there is a huge frustration right now with the fact that they're not receiving it on time. Delivery is not happening. And to the extent 12% have said, forget it, I'm not going to go into online for now. So while people want to go online, the infrastructure to support it is not yet fully in there because of obvious reasons, the spike in online shopping. Next. Here, we've asked people about grocery shopping, and I don't want to focus too much on this because Joe, I think, will tell us a lot about it. People would like to still go to buy their own groceries, especially the fresh products. So the fresh products, people want to feel it, they want to touch it, they want to smell it. So, and I guess this is, it will take a while before they trust online shopping for fresh products. However, everything else is on the rise in terms of industry here in this part of the world, I'm sure around the world. But of course, the big question is about cleanliness and about the virus itself. It remains there, but we can see that there is a bigger trend going towards by shopping online for food and meals. Now I'm done. I would like to pass back to Marjorie. She is back. Hi, Marjorie. I know technology wasn't very helpful today. You're on mute. Go ahead.
No. I know technology wasn't helpful, and in spite of the name on here, it's Marjorie Krause. I apologize for being a little bit late into this. So we're going to move now to our panelists, and we're going to start with Lars Peterson. And Mamoon, was everybody introduced? So
yes,
we've done that. Okay.
Not extensively though.
No, well, they can. They'll be introduced through their expertise as they give us their background here. So Lars, why don't you start? And I know you're going to, and Lars was, as you heard, the former president of IKEA North America, and he's going to talk a little bit about leadership during this crisis.
Thank you very much, Marjorie. Yeah, as a former CEO for IKEA in different markets, I've also have experienced certain moments of crisis and how very important it is that the leader is actually leading in a real practical way. And I try to be a little practical with my view here. What I've learned is that transparency in communication is key. It's people are looking at you, they want to have answers, and you have to be quick and swift and transparent in your answers. I think it's also important that you give the opportunity for coworkers and staff to be empowered to take decisions because a lot of things are happening in your company during a crisis, and a lot of people actually out there in the front line has to take decisions. I think it's also fair to say, and I've seen that particularly now, where it's this crisis, that a lot of companies are taking a lot of energy into the survival mode. But how important it is actually that the leader is also giving a perspective on the future, that someone is actually taking the lead of thinking about after the crisis. I think this is one part of that is actually to embrace the digitalization. Now is the moment to start to invest in digital. And you can say the digital revolution has shifted the power from the brands to the consumer. They are more educated, they're more empowered and organized and updated than ever. And of course, as a leader of a company that are selling consumer goods, you need to be in the middle of that in order not to lose track. Digital as the two-way communicator is key. And of course, in the next step of this, when e-commerce is going to be bigger, it's really important that the two-way communication is working really well. And I know that my colleagues will talk more about that. Digital as a workhorse. How will you be able to triple or quadruple your e-commerce sales if you cannot take care of your returns, for example? And there are many things that actually can be digitalized today in logistics that were not digitalized yesterday. And there is just to start to invest right now. Digital as a sales tool. Yeah, of course, you can now start to actually try out your dress in front of your digital mirror at home soon. And I think those are the things that sound science fiction, but I think it's time to start to look at an investment of that right now. The people, your co-workers and your staff, even if some of them are actually not working for you anymore, it's super important to keep contact, newsletters and updates, because you might want to reemploy them afterwards. And it's also important to think of that the tasks after the fact will not be the same as before. So investment in training and upskilling and new roles altogether is important, but don't I think it's important that diversity inclusion will be center point of this. So actually companies are not criticized for taking advantage of mass unemployment. And of course, the customer, keep the contact even if you cannot sell. I think it's very important that you are not disappearing as a brand during this period. And afterwards, to start up again, you need to have had a robust relationship with your customers, because the competitive situation will look completely different after the fact. And this could also be an advantage, an opportunity for your company to restart the business, since many of your competitors will actually be out of business. And of course, the last but not least, to be accessible through social media, and the customer, as I said before, is taking the lead, and you need to be in the middle of that and invest in robust tools to be able to have a great contact with your customers in the future.
Thanks, Lars. Rania, you've been on the front lines doing all the things that Lars has been talking about. So what is your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, it was this was really interesting to listen to. I think, I mean, to introduce myself through this, I'll probably talk about, my role and the role of the organization getting to COVID in a state where, thank God, we had a backbone in place to be able to accelerate the adoption that is obviously happening with or without us, of the demand going online, of the working from home, etc., and all the points that Lars mentioned. Part of transformation, and without calling it digital transformation, which was, a word that we dropped at the beginning of it, is the idea of how can we create this culture of constant innovation, agility, and how can we constantly be ready to accelerate and not be lost in, the bureaucracies of the past and the very heavy structures and processes. So the way that we've gone about it as a group is we've really focused on the 3 Ps of, really working on people, working on our processes and our platforms. And it took us a few years to really organize ourselves in that way, in order to be able to be in a situation that nobody's ever anticipated, that we've had to all of a sudden just stop all the brick and mortar, stop all the traditional business, and shift all of our energy from our people and our customers into the digital sphere that we had created for, 15% potentially of our business, but not for it to represent 100% of our business during the closure of our stores. We're a retail company. Our transformation vision was to move from being a traditional retailer to being a hybrid retailer that is able to be at the fingertips of customers everywhere. So that was really the vision. And, during this time and at the beginning, we were able to accelerate the deployment of 20 plus websites and really look at how to re-engage our traditional teams to support the scale and the pressure that our warehouses were getting. How can we really take the sales expertise of our brick and mortar team and our salespeople to really turn it into engaging with our customers through the tools that we had put in place, and how to really start that clienteling at home. And like Lars said, not being disconnected from the customer in regards to content, and we'll speak about this probably later, but also making sure that we as individuals are not disconnected from the customer during this time. So that technology, and when I say hybrid, it's really, which was our vision, to bring the store and our brands into all the different channels. So once we had to put off, unfortunately, our physical stores, that didn't interrupt the conversation. Obviously interrupted, a big part of the business because there's tourism and travel that comes with it, but it didn't interrupt us to be able to use this innovation to stay relevant and to stay connected. And last and not least, which is the data and analytics. And now more than ever, what we're doing is we're listening to our customer service teams. We're looking at our data and what it's telling us to quickly innovate on our operations while we're going and while we're learning, to make sure that we keep the customer experience intact during this time. Easier said than done, considering the scale that we are all getting online during such a short period of time, but it's definitely one of the biggest learnings that we've had in the transformation to date.
Thank you, Rania. Joe, you've had to look at this across a whole series of kinds of industries and businesses. And I wonder, you know, what you can say about how this has kind of accelerated your development.
Sure. First, thank you, Marjorie, for having me on this webinar. It's a real pleasure. So I'm not going to be going through all the numbers on this slide, and most of the trends you see here are actually in line with what Ma'moon presented in terms of survey results. And these are actually the outcome of similar work that we're doing in analytics across the board, across the different markets we're in and the businesses we're in. But I'm gonna probably talk less about the numbers and take these 2 minutes to give you like a backdrop of the situation before we get into the Q&A and how we're looking at this in terms of what's known and what's unknown at this stage. So we all know that this pandemic is basically leading to an economic crisis. Global estimations are saying it's gonna be somewhere between $9 to $10 trillion in impact, right? Eventually, the economy will recover, driven by government stimulus plans and by industries innovating and by the healthcare situation getting better once a cure or a solution is in place. However, this recovery will not happen overnight, and we know now that sectors will be impacted differently, right? And for us as a group, it's really important to understand this at the sector level because we're quite diversified in terms of the industries we're in, right? So we know that travel, dining, and entertainment will likely incur a very long-term damage, whereas industries or sectors like grocery, home, and e-commerce are already seeing a big surge, and they're going to keep prospering in the future, right? On top of the economic crisis, and this is following on what Ma'moon was saying, we are seeing fundamental changes in consumer behavior. A lot of people are calling this a new normal, but if you really look at these trends, you'll see that most of these trends were already there. The change now is they've accelerated at an exponential pace, right? From digital penetration, and I think Rania mentioned, and when brick and mortar players in the region are planning for digital, they plan to somewhere between 10 and 15, and suddenly this is already 70 to 100% of these players' revenue. So there has been a huge exponential shift, both from a customer perspective and from a business focus on e-commerce, right? There's also an increased obsession with health and safety, which was always there for consumers, but they never really felt that safety was an issue. Now they feel it and they're reacting to this. Obviously, working from home has been a big shift, but if you look at the trends for the past few years, there was let's say, a direction to go in that way, but it wasn't as big as it is today. Actually, I was thinking or talking to someone on the executive team yesterday, and I was telling them, imagine if we go back 3 months and we go to the executive team and we tell them, let's experiment where we send our 45,000 employees to work from home for a week. If we had done this 3 months ago, people would have told us that we were actually quite mad. We've done it now, it works perfectly. The solutions are in place, people are even more productive, communication is actually flowing, if you tell me, a bit probably better than what it used to. So these shifts were not expected, and I think they're here to stay. Most of these shifts we're saying, be it on digital, on convenience, on move to working from home, so on the consumer and employee side, are here to stay to a large extent. There are going to be a calibration, obviously, when things reopen, but we really believe that these are things that are not going to go back to where we used to be 6 months ago. So to conclude, before we get into the Q&A, I think the level of uncertainty we're living in now is much higher than anything else we've experienced in our lifetime, much higher than the economic crisis of 2008 and 2009. And what's really clear now is that what we don't know is much greater than what we know. And I think I just wanted to leave this with the audience and the other people actually on the panel, because it's important to keep a dynamic view on how the situation is evolving. And while you're listening to speakers like us or getting data from the market, it's also always important to take this with a view that no one really knows what's going to happen. So there are things that are certain, but there is so much that's uncertain. And we really need to keep that dynamic dialogue, I think, going on until we discover how things will pan out once we get out of the situation.
You know, it's very interesting sitting here in the United States because we're beginning to open up, and because we have 50 states, we're opening up in 50 different ways, at least 50, because within the states, they're also doing different things. And it's a real in some ways it's a real mess, in some ways it's a real hodgepodge of innovation. And so a lot of what you're saying really resonates, but I think all of us, maybe we are all should take a deep breath, because this whole movement to working remotely has, if you think about it in the context of the world, it's gone rather smoothly for the companies. And I think all of you involved in this should really be applauded for how agile and how swiftly companies moved. And those who couldn't probably, will not survive for the long term, because I think what you're saying about hybrids and some adaptation is, for the future is true, and none of us really know. So I just want to remind the audience that we're going to be taking questions from the audience in a few minutes. I have a couple questions just to get this started, but you should start to queue up, and feel free to put those questions right in the chat room. There's also a way you can raise your hand, but I will be looking at the chat room and try to put your questions together so that we can get through as many of them as possible before the end of our session. So Joe, I'd like to come back to you though on this question of innovation in business. How do you think this evolution is continuing on this changing environment? What do you see happening?
Sure. So there is no doubt that the retail industry and the consumer industries at large have been quite impacted, and they're going to be really impacted in the coming future by this pandemic and its repercussions. But these challenges could also be opportunities, right? If businesses look at this from a long-term resilience perspective and understand how to really use technology and innovation in the right way. And if I were to give my perspective, first broadly, and then I'll give probably a few examples of how MAF is looking at it. I think you can split the answer into two parts. What companies should do and how should they go about it? And obviously the answer is not only in technology, right? Because it's about technology and innovation is much broader than just technology or digital or the latest advancements on that front. So if I were to think of what are, let's say, the real imperatives that businesses have to think of to understand how things are evolving and to understand how to come out of this crisis with a winning proposition, I can think of like mainly 6 key imperatives, right? The first one is about the here and now. How do you focus on survival in a situation that's a bit of a Darwinian like shake-up, right? It's obvious that the crisis is going to shake the weak and it's going to embolden the strong. And a lot of businesses will probably go under if they weren't actually even performing well, even pre-crisis or pre-pandemic, right? That's a fact. And the businesses who are going to have a chance to win and thrive in the future, they really need to first rely on proper planning and resilience planning. They need to really think on how to leverage the data they have. And that could go from customer data, operational data, and any sort of data they can actually collect from their ecosystem and leverage it in a very dynamic way to keep track and the finger on the pulse to understand what's happening and keep making business decisions in a very dynamic way, right? So that's on the survival. And obviously there are things that you can do there. And as a group, we already started doing some of these activities. One has to do with how do you actually manage your cash flow in an optimized manner? And how do you make sure you allocate the resources required behind investments in technology and digital? Second is how do you reskill your employees and make sure today, if you have a part of the business that's closed because of the pandemic, how do you make sure you benefit from these resources you have, you reskill them and rotate them to support the business in other aspects of things? We've actually done something on this front. When our cinema business closed, our obviously grocery business was booming, especially on the digital side. And we really needed to scale our fulfillment capacity. So what we did is that we trained a big chunk of the cinema employees and we rotated them to support the Carrefour business in the fulfillment of online orders, right? And there is obviously from a continuity and survival perspective is looking at your value chain and trying to understand what components of that value chain are critical and should be probably brought locally. And this goes into sourcing, into private label, into procurement, all of these things that used to be considered global plays and the supply chain used to be very stable. is being put at risk, and there is a need to move all of this in-house. Obviously, technology is not the core in this, but it's a major enabler to be able to digitize these processes and be able to execute on them much quicker than what you would have actually done in a pre-COVID age, right? A second imperative, I think that's important before we get into the digital aspect of things is the need to understand the new mindset of the consumers we're engaging with, be it their focus on convenience, on health, and that mindset of being less interested in spending on products and on goods, and more interested in either convenience or experience. And that trend has been there for a few years. I think what the situation did is just accelerated it exponentially, right? And this requires businesses and the retail industry specifically to rethink how to really find innovative ways to target and engage with these cash-strapped consumers, right? By redefining propositions. If you take malls, for example, right? We in our portfolio, we're basically the largest mall operator in our region. And we have a premium, very large mega malls, and we have community malls. And we always looked at community malls as an asset class that wasn't, let's say, the right play to go into. Now with the situation, community malls are actually starting to serve a new purpose, because customers want that convenience, want to have these micro social interactions, and the mall can become a real hub for them to get what they need very quickly and very efficiently. So these definitions of business models are quite important, right? Third, and I think this is what everyone is talking about, is doubling down on digital, not only as an enabler of your existing business, but as a value creator by itself, right? We actually, obviously, the same way you guys did, we spoke to our consumers and customers, and 65 to 80% of them are saying that they're going to keep using the digital channels after the crisis is over. So if they move, they're going to keep using this in different ways and forms, which means whatever we were doing on digital, be it in Carrefour or in cinema or in malls, has to be accelerated and has to be looked at not only as a small percentage of our core business, but as a big value driver for the future of our business. And this means, from a capability perspective, we really need to scale our fulfillment capacity from a back-end perspective, because I think Ma'moon, when he was showing his survey, he mentioned a bit about the dissatisfaction that customers have with the delivery process, right? The packing, the delivery, the time, the out of stock whenever you're asking for something. And obviously that's a challenge that every retailer is facing in the region. And the only way to solve it is not by having a nicer front end or a nicer app. This requires back-end operational efficiency and excellence. And you need to have the capability to do so. You cannot just use your physical spaces and say, I'm adding a digital layer to them, right?
There's lots of questions. Just what you're presenting is so interesting, but I do want to give Rania a chance to also jump in. So maybe you just jump on your fourth one and we can have her respond a little to it. Okay.
Should I go? Should I let Rania jump in?
No, it'd be good to, let's let Rania jump in if we can for a minute. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Hi, Marjorie. Let me answer it from what we've done differently since COVID. And I think, obviously the transformation was ongoing before, but I'll just summarize it. I had noted, I'd summarize it in the 3 C's, and I'm not talking about diamonds. So if it was anything that we really worked on, first, obviously commerce, which is the survival, and we need to keep on doing business. And with that, it was accelerating our brands online. Funny enough, before that, we had approximately 12 plus websites. And just since COVID, we've accelerated to more than 20 websites today online. And that kind of innovation that we've seen, not only from the teams, but also the brands that we represent wanting to contribute to this, because it's the livelihood also of the business, but also not wanting to lose that connection with the customers. So the first C being commerce. The second one, which we think is very important to group, is content. And at the end of the day, our community has very quickly shifted, right, their behavior. So it was very important for us to be very authentic and to understand quickly, and our content community needed to shift that conversation and adapted to make sure that we are addressing our communities with the right products, in the right tone of voice, with the right reassurance for health and safety and all of that. And with this, we really had, first of all, an e-commerce task force that was put quickly in place. And then and they're all cross-functional, which is really great. And we've had also a CX task force that was put in place just for COVID, also cross-functional, to try to think and accelerate very fast the solutions. And last would be the customer, right? And at that point, what we try to see, fine, we have our online, but we also have the brands that are not online, and what can we create? And through innovation here, we find a lot of great solutions, such as clienteling solutions, how to be able to have contactless payment through links for payment, and continue this human-to-human interaction through our platforms that we had created pre-COVID. So really just, these are really the 3 C's that I would emphasize on, yeah.
So while you have the floor, maybe we'll go to the next question, and I want to speed this up a little bit in terms of the responses too. But you talked a lot about these websites and the interaction, so and communication being an important part of this. So I don't know if you want to elaborate in terms of the impact that communications had on employees, and on, you've talked a little bit about the community part of this and on the economy.
Yeah, sure, I'll try to keep it brief. Again, all the task forces that we did put in place during this time, one of them was communication. And we're very happy to have done this from day one, because you cannot, communicate enough during these times. And like Lars had said, we really gave a platform for our CEO, for our senior leadership, to constantly be there through webinars, through live Q&As, always working on FAQs, and we knew there was a million questions, and also making sure that all the tools that we had created pre-COVID were being used fully to be able to really get to our audience, from the management all the way to the warehouse operatives, through all the region that we manage. We have over 12,000 employees. So with that also, and the community that I was talking about, really understanding the audience, and what are they thinking about today, and how can we really shift this communication and increased communication. As a group, from a health and safety point of view, it was very important. We hear you, we know, we're in this together, and we're doing something about it, as a reassurance also to constantly bring them into our workforce, but also through brands, really ignite together and touch and have this real moment and genuine moment with the customers. And lastly, and I think that was also part of your question, the economy. So as a leader in the region, it was very important for us to stay and connected to the experts, to really look at what are the scenarios that we might anticipate. And with these scenarios, we also communicate them internally when we're doing our business assumptions and reviews. And we communicated very clearly with our partners globally, to make sure that we're really in control as much as we can, right, of forecasting what's to come and minimize really the impact. Minimize the impact, but very important, also map the growth, right?
So Mamoun, as a lifelong communicator, how do you see this in terms of what's your reaction to what you've heard?
We're talking now to 2 companies who have been in the forefront of engagement in this region. We always say in a time of crisis, the worst thing you could do is switch off the light and go dark, because it might as well be dead for your customers, and also for your team, for your staff. You have to be over communicating. I can never over communicate. You have to be properly engaged. You have to be talking to everybody. We live in a time of uncertainty, and uncertainty is the enemy of business. You cannot plan with uncertainty, but this is the world we live in. So you need to be able to engage and try as much as possible to minimize the impact of this uncertainty. Uncertainty also is the enemy of sanity of people. So engaging your own people, your own staff on a regular basis, in my view, will keep your business afloat. So I don't want to go into technical terms, but I think the worst thing you could do is shut off the light on your voice, and that would really hurt the business and hurt your relationship with your stakeholders.
Okay. So I have one last question, and then we have a dozen questions coming from the audience already. And Lars, I'd like to come back to you because I know how important, as you were running IKEA around the world, that that purpose was to IKEA and coming up with your North Star. And so I wondered how you see COVID affecting the way companies are looking at purpose, and how you think organizations should be known coming out of this. And then Joe, maybe you can comment a little bit on what Lars has to say, and then we'll get to the general questions.
Thank you, Marjorie. I think it was clear in Joe's presentation how very different priorities that the consumer will have post-COVID. And I think it's already now clear that many of the existential issues will be more and more important for people. And the consumer will demand more sustainable and responsible businesses. That's for sure. I think that also the consumer has a totally different capacity today with to share their point of view with the digital revolution. And the companies that cannot show that they came out of a crisis in a sustainable way will be hit pretty hard afterwards. So I think the winning concepts here are think of long-term, making sure that you connect to your culture and values, and that your purpose as a company is very clear for people. Transparency and communication during this to all stakeholders, improved relationship in the whole value chain based on trust and doing things the right way with suppliers and customers, improving working climate, increasing employee performance, and the motivation and productivity. I think it's very clear that people will ask, what did your company do during the COVID crisis? And if you don't have a good answer on that as a company, when it comes to relate to your purpose and to your reputation, I think with the digital revolution that has given all consumers a lot of power here, those companies will have difficulties. On the other hand, the ones that actually are showing a cold head and a warm heart during this period, they will have a chance to restart in a very positive way, also with tremendous opportunities that the market will give them in terms of a new competitive landscape. I just take a couple of examples very quickly about the companies who are actually doing things right now to contribute. I just saw H&M are now producing masks instead of dresses. I saw the shoe company Allbirds are donating $1 million worth of shoes to hospital workers. Is it big things? Maybe not, because not everyone can produce ventilators. But I think it's very important also small steps during this period that you show also as a company that you actually have an empathy and you want to be part of the solution for this problem. And that will be important afterwards.
Thanks. Joe, do you want to contribute to that?
No, I actually fully agree with what Lars was saying around building trust and being a responsible partner. But I'd like to expand it a bit. Obviously, you need to be a responsible partner and a trustworthy organization for the consumer, but we also look at it from a wider ecosystem. You have to be the same for your employees, for your partners, for the government entities, and for the wider society. So it shouldn't be only focused around the consumers or the customers you engage with, but with everyone you engage with within your ecosystem. I think that's important. Another thing I think organizations that should also be focused on from what to be known for and also how to do things is to do things a bit differently, right? So there is an imperative and a clear view to do things better. And I think Rania gave very good examples on how an organization should do things in a better way, in a more efficient way, in a more focused way. But there is also a responsibility on organizations to do things in a different way. Given today, the value pools are shifting, right? Consumers are in the driver's seat, and there's so much that an organization can do outside of its core business in terms of engaging with customers or also generating value from new streams. And I think that's quite important when you're looking at what to do with digital.
Rania, I don't know if you want to jump in on this important topic before, and then we have questions from the audience.
I mean, for me, I just noted a cold heart and a cold hand and a warm heart, which I love. I think it's a very difficult time for all of us. We adore and love our employees. We adore and love our customers, you know, and we love our stores. So all I want to say and add to this is just, I really hope that we come out of this with, you know, being remembered for doing the right thing, and just being genuine and you know, with empathy. And I think that's the most important thing, really.
Yeah, I think what we've heard so much from people, and a lot of surveying we've done over the last couple months, is authenticity is also an important part of that. And I think that more than ever, I think our customers, our employees for sure, are just looking for the truth and looking for authentic leadership. And I think that's very demonstrated by the four of you actually today. So anyway, so if we move to questions, there were a bunch of questions. I'm going to group them together so that we can get to as many as possible. There were a lot of questions about malls and about the future of malls. And given that in the region that it was noted that malls are a place of social integration, they're a place where people congregate. It's more than a shopping experience. So how is this going to change? And then also, will that drive a change in the retail experience? And what are all of the, you know, the things that come out of that, basically? So there were 3 or 4 questions relating to the future of the shopping experience and the impact that has on the social experience of malls.
Marjorie, if I may, I will add to your question. I mean, I think is that the current fact of the matter is that there are tens of malls under construction right now, huge ones, more biggest malls in the world being built around this region. So that now you can add this to the question and see how we can answer this question, maybe Joe or Rania.
So do you want the view from a mall operator or from a huge?
Well, I think with the 3 of you, we're going to get an interesting perspective, because IKEA traditionally is not in malls. So they've created a different kind of shopping experience to make up for that. So anyway, so Joe, why don't you start?
Yeah, sure. So I think there is a trend that started a few years ago, right, where consumers were becoming less interested about going to a mall to transact and more interested to go there to actually engage and let's say get a better experience, right? And this was something we've observed for the past few years, and we're trying to push towards a new, let's say, design in malls where customers can come in and get entertained. So entertainment was a big component of the future of the malls. Food was also a big component, right? And we're also looking at a different way of structuring our malls, where stores are no longer places to transact, but places to, they become like showrooms where you can come get an experience, get a mix of both a digital and a physical experience, get recommendations, engage with others. And most of our tenants in our malls, the likes of Shalhoub and others, were also moving in that direction, right? So I think the future of mall, be it in the region or globally, is not going to be determined by the size of the mall. Going back to Mahmoud's point, yes, of course, some malls will no longer be there in the future, in my view. And what's going to differentiate a mall is the experience that it's actually bringing to its customers, both from a physical point of view and a digital point of view, right? And the same thing, it's quite important for malls, for them to survive, is to redefine their engagement with their tenants. Today, the engagement with the tenant is a very transactional thing. We offer space and footfall, and they're paying us rent. I think that whole proposition has to be rethought, and the engagement and that partnership with the tenants has to be more strategic, in a sense where we as mall operators should be providing them, beyond the traffic that we're bringing to the mall physically, also a lot of services that could help them do their businesses better, from data to digital services to support on technology in terms of implementing store of the future. And these are areas now we're looking into.
Rania? Or Lars, who wants to jump in? Rania, go ahead.
I mean, honestly, to add to this, I think that the role of the physical store or mall was anyways being challenged before COVID. You know, our CEO, Patrick, is an eternal optimist, and I tend to take that also. And I think that we're going to make it out of this eventually. And in all our scenarios, you know, we hope, at least in the region, you know, to be back to it at least by the last quarter of next year, you know, worst case. So with that in mind, we still think that the role of the mall is and the store is important, but it needs to be, like Joe was saying, it needs to be a place of entertainment. It needs to be a place of discovery. It needs to be a social hub, and it needs to be a place where people feel comfortable just hanging out and discovering. What needs to be very important is that we don't depend on it for transactions. And that's where we need to build the whole ecosystem around it. And that's what's being accelerated today. What came to my surprise, which I find super interesting today, is how quickly the salespeople were ready to start engaging with these tools and are really working on this clienteling part of making sure the relationship can go to your home in the way that you'd like it if you want to. So if the customer is ready to come back, we'll be ready to receive them. If they want to stay home, by then we should all be in a place to also still engage. That's.
Thank you. I don't know, Lars, if you want to add anything from a non-mall perspective, but.
No, it's, I think malls are looking very different in different parts of the world. In US, it's already very over-malled. And the A, B, and C malls, the C malls will go out of business already. And now, of course, with this, it's accelerating even faster. But I think in Europe and in Middle East, it's also very much still a demand for surfaces, and also demand for the experience and the meeting place. Mm-hmm. So I think in that context, I think the mall can still have a very important part to fill.
So the next series of questions, I would say, are all grouped around the investment required to go digital. And maybe this one, Lars, I'll start with you as a former CEO, because they were saying, there were questions were about in digital transformation and the kind of investment that has to be made, and also in data collection and how that relates to the P&L. Where do the costs, how is this going to be factored in from a cost point of view? How are businesses going to manage around this?
Well, everything that is directly connected to e-commerce should be on that part of the P&L, to be a little bit technical here. But I think it's so much which is digital today that it's an infrastructure investment for the whole company. And I think the questions are not so much maybe where do you put it on the P&L? The question is, how do you want to take the next step in developing your company? And I think to say that digital is not for us, or maybe it's too expensive, or maybe later will actually not work, because digital can also be a phenomenal workhorse to improve your productivity and your bottom line and your cost. The problem with it is that first you have to do the investment, and then you can harvest the result of that. And you, as a leader, need to have a robust dialogue with your board about the long-term view on this. If we talk about short-term, it's going to be very difficult to find a place in your P&L for digital investment, because it's very expensive in the beginning and the harvest comes later.
Well, and the question related to that is cash irrelevant now? Are we ever going to use cash? First of all, people think it's the dirtiest form of, transmitting disease, but, are we going totally to digital? So if you want to incorporate anything else in the answer, if Joe or Rania, if either of you have thoughts about what Lars just said, feel free to.
I actually would love to build on what Lars said. I'm not, the expert into if cash is going to disappear. And in our region, that would hurt their business, because cash on delivery is still a very big point of payment. But to build on data, and I saw there was a lot of questions on this, and it rings very close to my heart, because recently we had a debate, where does data sit? And if the investment is in data is considered a digital investment, in my view, it is not where we would really be seeing its best productivity. We believe that data sitting in operations and really being an investment towards having, like Lars was saying, better efficiencies in doing business and using it as a growth driver and being able to prove that it can help you with your immediate needs. For us, we've estimated that data can help us grow e-commerce, and it's absolutely necessary to have the right tools and the right platforms and clean data, because that could be an immediate revenue there. We also said today, because cash is vital, we need it for supply chain, and that was another place where focused on, and obviously with the customer and having the right data, the clean data, to continue on being able to virtually stay engaged and understand when and where we need to stay engaged. So with these are life or death, supply chain, e-commerce, and customer today, you need to be completely, you can't be blind nowadays on that. So that's how I would pitch it to the CFO for whoever asked that question. But on cash, I will let somebody else answer that.
Joe, do you have anything you want to add in that regard?
So on cash, that's a very, let's say, specific question. On obviously today, cash on delivery is big in the region. The latest numbers we're seeing now, because of the restrictions on paying in cash, be it physically or for online, I think there is a move towards cashless payments. And I think once this move is in place, I don't think it's going to go back, right? When people experience the convenience of digital payments, I think they'll adopt this to a large extent. And I think the question has another component to it. Will people in the region adopt the buy now, pay later type of solutions, all these installments, post-pay solutions? I believe it is the case. The numbers in the US are huge. And if people, companies like Walmart, they expect from the buy now, pay later an uplift of 20 to 25% in sales on items where this is offered. We've run some tests within Carrefour, and we saw a similar uplift on items where we offer such a solution. And it's going to be even more important now because consumers are becoming more cost conscious given the situation. So I believe it is definitely something that people will look into. So that's on that question. On the initial question around digital and data, I agree with Rania how she split it. So the data is not only a digital investment, it's an investment in your business, right? Be it digital or physical. And it's going to help from process optimization to better customer engagement to setting up new businesses, right? Today is digital, or it could be something else. And that's how we look at it. And that's the work we've been doing on data around setting up centers of excellence and cascading this and making sure analytics-driven people are embedded in every function in every business. I think on digital, Lars mentioned something that's very critical that a lot of companies actually miss sometimes. Value creation in digital is very different than how companies are used for, physical companies are used for to value creation, which is typically positive EBITDA, cash flow coming into my business. Digital doesn't work that way, and it requires a lot of investments, not in CapEx, but mainly in OpEx around customer acquisition and servicing orders. And companies who want to go seriously into digital, not only to enable or be defensive about their business, but to generate value in digital, have to look at value creation in a totally different way. And that could be in terms of what value it brings on the customer point of view. It doesn't have to be only financial, or in different ways to monetize in the market, right? So I think the monetization angle around digital, if you were to go aggressively in digital, you have to build a case that goes beyond when will it turn profitable and how much cash will it give me end of the year, right? I think that's good.
And just very quickly, if you have any thoughts, any of you, on build or buy, if companies have big gaps on going digital or on their gaps in this area, is the idea to build it internally or to buy something? That adds on. There was a question about that.
Buy.
Buy. Anyone else? Anyone else, buy or build?
I would say it has to be a mix, right?
Okay.
That's how we've approached it, but I don't know if we're approaching it right. So far, it's been working, but I don't think there is one solution that fits every business in every market.
Okay.
There are things that you need to buy for sure, and thinking that you can always do everything in-house is definitely wrong. You can either buy or partner, that's for sure. But there are things like data, for example, and analytics. You can buy solutions, you can hire people, but you need to really have full control over that capability. Other capabilities like fulfillment, last mile, you can always buy. And if you want to start an e-commerce business, obviously it's better to start with an established business with enough traffic, customer base, and the right talent. So I agree with Lars on that.
Okay, so I'm going to switch the topic a little bit because there were several questions about small business in this whole mix of things, because you all represent larger businesses. And there was a concern that there haven't been really government subsidies on these smaller businesses, that the culture of these businesses and what they do for society, especially in the Middle East, that they'll be the first ones to disappear, and that may totally change the nature of shopping. And that won't this and change the entire customer experience? And what do we do about small businesses going through this whole situation? Mamoun, you may have some cultural ideas about this, and Lars, you're shaking your head. So why don't you start, Lars, and we'll give Mamoun a chance to jump in.
I think it's also, now this is not, of course, typically for Middle East, but I think it's also part of the change here is also customers and consumers are actually looking for something very different. They're also looking for something which is not the big chains, or something that it's not completely global, and thinking about local as something interesting to actually be a consumer with. And I think that is something that can actually help in the future, because I think the consumers are shifting in that direction.
Yeah,
so go ahead, please, Rania, and then.
Yeah, no, I just really wanted to agree that one of the biggest trends that we're seeing right now is really this pride in local craftsmanship and local brands, for one, but also our experience in a multi-brand business in the past. It was always that point of differentiation working with small designers. And we're trying very hard to make sure that that we keep, as big retailers, supporting them where we can. But I strongly believe, and this is probably addressed to Joe, that I think our landscape needs to also support this. So if they're not getting subsidies from governments, at least they need to still have a place to showcase and not have to compete with the big players when it comes to their costs. Because without them, I think the diversity and if you want, the character of retail will definitely lose a big part of it, big part of the experience.
Yeah, I agree. But actually, if you were to think about it, I'm not as worried as the person who's asking the question, because these companies also, they're more nimble. Their cash burn is much less than what the large companies have, and they're actually solving a problem. As long as you're an SME that is solving a problem, you can control your spending for the time being, right? And you find the right partners to engage with, you're going to find a way of coming out of the situation more successful, right? And more sustainable, I believe. So I think that's a fact. But I think also the ecosystem in the region, even pre-COVID, had challenges in terms of funding SMEs. Besides government, even from a private sector and investments, we always had a challenge at the growth phase of startups to bring in the right investors to fuel the growth of these businesses. And that has been a challenge in the region for quite a while. We done quite a bit of investments in startups, and we've engaged a lot of these SMEs in different ways, either through direct investments or strategic partnerships, or by giving them what they actually need. We've done something recently that we're going to announce soon. We, as a private sector, went to some of these startups and we told them there are things that you need that are not only money related, right? You need access to customers, you need access to marketing, you need access to a footprint, physical footprint. So we got some of these startups that are complementary to our offering, and we're going to bring them into our ecosystem, right? With no investments, but build these strategic partnerships with them to give them access to our ecosystem, be it physical, digital, or in terms of customer base, to help them fuel their growth. And I think companies in the region could do more of this to support the SME sector.
If I may add, the governments in the region have put in money to support the SMEs. They've put the mechanism, funds for loan guarantees. I know about that. It's true in the UAE and it's true in Saudi. Maybe the implementation of these funds and distribution hasn't done as smoothly as it should be so far. but it's there. The mechanism is there. So that's one aspect, and it's crucial. Otherwise, we will see the demise of a lot of SMEs. Now, we know for a fact, given this current environment, many SMEs will not survive, no matter what. I mean, you can see some big business like MAF and others are supporting as much as they can. But we know for a fact SMEs come from the heart of necessity. So there will be a lot of new SMEs sprouting and coming and to benefit and to help and fill a gap, the gap of the future, if they are not being able to fill the gap of today. SMEs also define a culture of a country. So in a sense, it's crucial that they survive. So I believe we all have a role to play to help SMEs, but we also know for a fact that there will be SMEs will go and SMEs will appear in the near future.
Actually, I'm not sure if I still have time. Sorry, Marjorie, but just one
that's okay.
point to add to this. I think, but that's my view. I might be a bit controversial on this, but I don't believe in bailouts in general, like government interventions and bailouts, because I believe what the government should be focused on is growing the economic pie for these businesses to be able to thrive, right? So you're never gonna grow SMEs or sustain large businesses if you don't have a large economy. And this is where the focus of governments and public and private sector should be, on how can we grow the economy, be it in the markets we're in, let's say UAE now, or across the region by opening the region more and ensuring mobility of data and people, ensuring mobility of investments and the facilitation of these things. Because once we look at this region and grow it as an economic region, this is where you can help both large organizations and small ones to thrive in a pandemic or in a post-pandemic situation. So the focus should be on economic growth rather than anything else.
So there was another whole series of questions about consumer behavior. And about, especially as it related to, and I'll give you pieces of the different parts. You know, in terms of going digital, what happens to non-essential brands, especially the high-end fashion brands, and how do you protect fashion brands at a time of when digitalization may mean that things are more, you know, they're not really geared at that market necessarily. And then also the other question relating to that is, how do you guys plan for looking forward when the data that you might be using is based on past experience? And this is such a transformation of experience that is the past data even relevant as you're planning for the future? So these were a series of questions around figuring out consumer behavior. Joe, you were smiling at this one, so.
It's so many questions. I'm thinking if I were to answer where to start, but I think, I'm not sure if Morania is still on the call, but yes, I think the high-end premium brands, she's the best person to answer that question and the future of these brands. In terms of how to plan in such a situation, that's definitely a big challenge. And obviously looking at historical data could help in some situation when you try to correlate with some other economic crisis that happened or a political challenge that happened in the region or globally to see how things evolve. But there's no situation similar to what we're going through. So the best way to do it is to keep a finger on the pulse of how customers are behaving and their preferences as regularly as possible. And that's how we're doing it. So we're not really looking at the past. We've established a more regular and more dynamic way of first looking at our performance data, testing with the customers, and keep a track of macroeconomic situations and scenarios. And these three are an input to how we're driving our strategy. Obviously, the way we're doing it now is scenario-based. So given that the range of uncertainty is wide, we look at the data and we build scenarios, and then we say, if this happens, this is what's going to happen. It's more of like a game theory approach. And as things progress, I think it's going to take a few more weeks or months until things settle and we have a better clarity. And then we should be able to move faster because we've already built the scenarios and the enablers required to go in one direction or the other. So that's on plan.
Any other thoughts about that? We have about a little less than 5 minutes left, and I want you all to think about one more question as we close, but unless there's some more questions about the more response to this one. And that
maybe
is,
I can say a couple of
yeah,
things here, Marjorie. I
please.
think the consumer behavior is, of course, also the behavior of how you buy and so on. But consumer behavior and the authenticity of the company will be very tightly woven into. I think already today, what is called the retail apocalypse is very much a fashion retail apocalypse because of the online business have taken over. So I think the problems with the ones who are not very well versed on the online business today as an apparel retailer have, I mean, already had a lot of problems with that and will have even greater problems in the future. But I think the combination of who you are, what kind of reputation you have, and the way that you present and merchandise your goods online will actually be the winning concept for the future.
And
I think, Marjorie, your question about luxury brands, I think people would expect an answer, a view from Rania, given that her company represents quite a few of those, if you have a view on that.
I'm really sorry, I disconnected at the question. So, are we asking the luxury?
The question was really relating to consumer behavior in a digital age and how you protect luxury brands so they don't get marginalized or cheapened in this process.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely right now a lot of, a lot of the trends that were there pre-COVID, like digital transformation, are also accelerating. There's definitely a very big focus on sustainability. There's a question that comes from both our customer community, but also in the community of designers and luxury players right now, to rethink the schedule, to rethink how we do things, to become more authentic, to become more real. And I think that that transformation as a brand, because I'm not going to say that it's digital or non-digital, as a brand, you need to rethink a little bit how you're engaging. But luxury players in general, and for me at least, and for us, sustainability is luxury, because the craftsmanship that goes into luxury product, the fact that it gets passed from generation to generation, the care that we take into our stores, etc., is only going to become more and more important nowadays. And not to see heavy discounting and lots of inventory going into the market. We need to be very, very attentive to all of that.
Okay, we're just about out of time, but since this is the beginning of a whole series on leadership, and this was to be a spotlight on leadership as it relates to technology and innovation, I wondered if each of you have one idea that you want to give those remaining on the call for one piece of advice and working through what's ahead. There's the unknown of the new, we're hearing it being called the next normal now, because at the end of the next normal will be the new normal, and people aren't sure what that is. So maybe you have some thoughts about that. So Rania, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I think, if I can think of one thing, is definitely recovery and efficiencies is on everybody's mind, but don't forget to keep innovating, because the next normal is a reshape of the economy, and you could either be a player in that, or you could be a follower that could be too late to the game.
Lars?
Transparency and communication with all your stakeholders, frequent and accurate, and go for an investment in digital already now.
Hamoon?
Innovation and communication. Well, given my background, I think you have to continue communicating. You don't have to have all the answers. People know it's an uncertain time, but you need to continue communicating.
And Joe, you get the last word.
Yeah, sure. I have to be inspirational now. So I think make sure to do better to survive and recover, and focus on innovating differently in order to thrive and win. And data is the way to go in anything you need to do. That's the way of the future.
Well, thank you all very much. I want to thank our panelists for a very insightful session, and I certainly learned a lot. And I want to thank those of you who have put your interesting questions. There was one question I know we didn't get to that was specifically for Joe, and I'm going to pass it on to him, and perhaps Basil, we can get you the answer. And it was about technology, healthcare innovation. So we will try to respond to you as well. So thank you all for joining us. Yes.
I'd like to wish you a happy birthday.
Yeah, thank you. You know, thank you all for joining and making this the biggest birthday party I've ever had. So I appreciate that, especially in this time of social distancing. You made my day. So thank you,
for
Rania,
having
for
Thank you,
that.
Marjorie.
Okay, take care. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you and
Bye-bye.
happy birthday, Marjorie.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.